Good evening. This is a meeting of the Community and Economic Development Committee. It is now 6:07, and this is the 25th of November, 2024. My name is Jeff Schilling. I am the chair. I have Mr. Pierce to my left and Mrs. Snee to my right. And tonight we are going to provide a recommendation to council regarding the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission that council enact legislation to amend the zoning code to prohibit adult use cannabis operators and to provide for adult use testing laboratory as permitted use in the M3 General Industrial District. I think we've had some discussion on this before. I think we'll start. Is there any, we'd like to, on the comments tonight, if you have something new to add, we'd love to hear from you. If it's, we have heard from a lot of people, and we've taken that under advisement. But if you have anything new to say, feel free to step up from the audience and give us your 2 cents worth. Pardon?
Just go over it and refresh.
We can't hear you if you're not on the mic.
Just to go over it? Well, okay. I mean, essentially, again, what we're looking at here is exactly what we read, is that we have, the Troy Planning Commission has made a recommendation to council. We have they're asking us to approve that so that their recommendation would go into force, and it involves amending the zoning codes, and so that's the original idea of this thing for a cannabis, any type of cannabis operations within the city of Troy. So that's basically where we are. Again, are there any comments from the audience on this? Okay. Seeing none, then
Mr. Chair,
take our committee or our council people next. And
did you want to take the council your committee folks first?
We can. You have some comments you'd like to do?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to confirm what I think we all understand happened at the November 20th meeting of the Planning Commission, that they did not take any action. So we still have a recommendation from the Troy Planning Commission for not allowing adult cannabis operators in the city of Troy. I just want to take this time to thank the citizens and elected officials who have offered information and opinions on whether or not we should allow adult cannabis operators within the city limits of Troy. I appreciate the Planning Commission reconsidering this item at this committee's request and making their recommendation to council, or making their wishes known. This is a nuanced issue, and our input has included thoughtful discussion from those with differing viewpoints. I share the concern of those who have presented information about the harms of drug use, especially among minors. I also recognize that there are those citizens who support marijuana use for medicinal reasons, and that statewide recreational use was approved by voters. I don't agree that the vote on recreational use necessarily reflected Troy citizens' viewpoints about locating dispensaries within the city limits, but it is a fact to consider. Based on the input we have received in the past discussion of this committee, I can support the location of one adult cannabis operator within the B4 zoning district, otherwise known as the Highway Business District. I cannot support more than one operator in the city or operator location in any other zoning district because of my concerns that an operator might be able to locate in or near the downtown business district. I understand that a committee recommendation to the full council that is different from what the Planning Commission has forwarded will require a supermajority of council for approval, and this might not be possible. In order to make a firm decision on this issue, if this committee forwards a recommendation to council which is not approved, I expect that council might move to officially adopt legislation calling for a total ban. The most important consideration to me is that the city is specific in its zoning code definition of an adult cannabis operator as a distinct business category and defining where those businesses may or may not be allowed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Pierce.
So if I heard you accurately, you want to move forward with this legislation and then let the council amend it later on.
I said I can support a recommendation from this committee, as we discussed at the last meeting, that there be a specific zoning district. We did discuss differing numbers, but I can only support one operator in that zoning district.
Okay, thank you.
No more questions?
No more.
I'm going to reserve my comments for just a couple of minutes. Is there any council members who would like to speak on this issue?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Ms. Snee, you're looking to amend this recommendation to exactly what you just read there, is that correct?
Yes, as we discussed at our last meeting.
In listening to the previous meeting that I could not attend, and the Planning Commission, and doing the research that I have, that was my original concurrence with what you just read there. In my unofficial polling, I think that the majority of council the supermajority, will support that recommendation. And I just would like to go on record as saying I do support that, primarily from the medical end. 30 years of law enforcement, your schooling, Mrs. Westfall's schooling and medical, and Mrs. Marshall with her extensive background in schooling, and all the issues and the conditions that we've seen over the years in families are sometimes very horrible. However, that is not the majority. That is not even, it is a fraction of the majority of people that are affected by these things, of people making bad decisions. So I think it is important to recognize that, look at the voting of the state specifically, looking at even the vote of the city of Troy's, in which the ban did pass 16 of our precincts out of the 20 I believe we have. However, speaking of that, there are two businesses north of us and one south, and I think that having some local availability is not necessarily a good thing, but primarily the medical for our citizens here in town that do have mobility issues far outweigh some of the negatives. And I do fully support keeping it out of the downtown or anywhere near downtown. And further, I would like to see any tax money that is gained from this as a side issue go towards our health district payment that we make to the county of Miami County each year. And if we do have any additional, then I would put it over into the recreational, but I would like to see that in the whole ordinance.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, that is another one of my questions, is until we have someone operating with a license, I would think that we wouldn't have to make a decision now about any, where any proceeds or tax monies may go, that would come at that time. But yes, that would be a discussion for later.
Okay.
Correct. I think that is, would be the appropriate place for it. And even if it's further defined as mental health issues or whatever, or drug issues, even with all of the opioid money that has come through our county and our city specifically, is important.
Okay.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Any other council people would like to recognize Mr. Seaver?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the time. I believe it's been disseminated, but I did ask Mr. Kerber for a legal opinion. Last time I raised some issues at the meeting 2 weeks ago, whenever that was, and I forwarded those to Mr. Kerber, and I believe they've been disseminated to everyone. So I'm not weighing in on the committee's role here, but I did want to publicly thank Mr. Kerber for his endeavors in getting that out to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members have any questions or comments? Okay.
I would like to just...
Oh, go ahead, Susan. I'm sorry. Mrs.
That's
Westfall,
right.
I recognize you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just...
You're my blind spot over there. I'm sorry.
I just want to reiterate what's already been said. Basically, I've been a nurse for 42 years, but I've worked corrections for the past 26 years in juveniles, and I've seen much more problems with alcohol than marijuana. That doesn't make it right, but I do know of many people that have gotten relief medically because of nausea with cancer patients. I've seen pain relief. So there's some good to be done with this, and to be able to zone it in the right place out of the downtown, I think is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other council people? Mr. Whidden, please.
I just want to say that the amended proposal that the committee is considering at this moment is something I could support. So if that just leads some way to Mr. Phillips' words about there might be some more support on council. So just want to say thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. I was wondering if Mr. Kerber could help me with the answers to these, because they're more legal questions than they are other questions.
Good evening, Grant Kerber, City Law Director.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the first question is, the state of Ohio defines cannabis operator, which is what is listed in the recommendation from the Planning Commission. They use that name, but it actually includes various levels of cultivators, processors, and dispensaries. Each of these levels and processors and dispensaries have separate definitions and licensing requirements. Can the City of Troy limit the presence of cannabis operations in the City of Troy to include only adult-use dispensaries, as defined in the Ohio Revised Code Section 3780.15, or do we have to use the term cannabis operator, which includes the processor and cultivator and that type of thing as well?
Mr. Chair, I believe that the city can. I would want to revisit that language just to ensure that's the case. But I'm 90% working off my recollection with that is in fact the case, that it doesn't have to be all operators treated the same, meaning cultivators, processors, and dispensaries, that the zoning can address those differently.
Okay.
May I ask a
Go ahead.
question along the same lines? I thought in my memory that when we dealt with medical marijuana only, that we made a decision then to not allow cultivators and processors specifically, and maybe Mr. Davis can weigh in, but I thought that existed, that we didn't allow those two, I guess, business types in the
On the medical
city.
end.
Just on the medical end, so
Right.
the recreational would include those also.
Well, it depends on what the committee chooses to do. And if there is a thought that you want to treat processors and cultivators differently than dispensaries, I think you could certainly do a recommendation in that regard, with the caveat that I would want to just be 100% certain that that's allowable. But I strongly suspect that you can.
Okay, and just to clarify, my comments were in relation to dispensaries only,
Right,
not
but
cultivators or processors.
And that's why I brought this particular question up, because of the information, the recommendation from the Planning Commission said cannabis operators, and I think that's too broad of a term for what we're trying to do, in my opinion. But that's why I wanted to check with you on that.
Sure.
Okay, now I've got another question for you on this. Under Section 3780.09, they talk about testing labs. And it's sort of a confusing section of the code to me. Obviously, I'm not an attorney. But it appears that somebody that has license in both testing labs and as a dispensary can use the same location to do both, without necessarily having another, so that if, again, what we're talking about here is, one of the questions that is before us is, are we going to allow testing laboratories in our M3 zoning? And so the question is, can somebody say, okay, I'm going to open up a testing lab, and then because they're already licensed as a dispensary, then would they be able to sneak that in under the rug, sort of the thing, and open up a dispensary on top, inside their testing laboratory?
Presently, there's no mechanism for that. There was a mechanism for, if you already had a medical dispensary, they treated those existing facilities differently than brand-new startups.
Right.
There's no provisions in there as far as the testing lab. Now, there are some specific prohibitions as to what a city can do with respect to testing labs, like affiliated with, I believe it's schools of higher education, that the city cannot, if Ohio State wanted to bring a testing lab to Troy, if they chose to, that's something that the city could not regulate through zoning.
Okay. Okay, yeah.
But can I clarify on that?
Go ahead.
But we are saying that they must locate within the M3 industrial district, a testing lab.
Well, I'm not sure if that's what's being proposed.
I mean,
That's
that's what has been proposed.
Yeah,
So, okay.
that's what's been
All right.
proposed, okay. And then the last question, is my understanding that under section 3780.25, the Ohio Revised Code, Troy City Council has the ability to pass an ordinance by majority vote requiring an adult cannabis operator to cease operations within 60 days of the passage of the ordinance. This vote may be overturned by the filing of a petition with the Board of Elections by the adult cannabis operator and a majority vote of the registered voters in the city of Troy in the next scheduled general election. So essentially what this says is that if for some reason this thing goes sideways on us, doesn't meet our expectations or something crazy happens with it, we have the ability to shut down a cannabis operator, by city ordinance, and then of course that ordinance has to stand up to a vote of the residents of the city of Troy. Is that a correct interpretation of that law?
Well, that mechanism is in place definitely for situations in which there was an existing medical dispensary, and then if Troy chose to say we're not going to have recreational dispensaries within the city, or we're not going to allow them in the zone where that medical dispensary is, that option was in place. I don't recall that mechanism being in place for allowing an existing operator to say, once you're established, the city can say, you have to go out of business, you're not allowed there anymore. I don't recall that being in there, but I'd be happy to double check.
Would you check on that and get back to us? Because again, I think that would be another safeguard, just in case this thing does go sideways, we have an out. And I'd like to verify that if we could.
I did want to raise one additional thing that, and first off, given the nature of, depending upon what the committee recommendation is, normally, I have legislation prepared for the next council meeting. I think that may be a struggle or an expectation that I would not expect council to have it on the next agenda, only given the fact that I want to have all these legal questions answered for you prior to the preparation of the legislation.
Okay.
Additionally, one thing that Mrs. Snee raised as part of her recommendation was that only one be located in there. I want to ensure that that's a permissible zoning thing or a zoning regulation that the city can do to limit the number in a certain zone.
I thought that the ability to limit the number of licenses was a part of the approval. I mean, check on it.
I know the state certainly has that, and I just want to double check that.
Okay, because that would definitely change my thinking.
Certainly, right, sorry. And so we don't want there to be any unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
So, that's just another item I'll look at.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kerber. I don't have any more questions. Anybody have any other questions for Mr. Kerber?
I have a question for Mr. Kerber, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Seaver, please.
Mr. Kerber, just for clarification and edification so it doesn't get confusing, I was reading 3780, and I guess its application, we've all expressed concerns about it being downtown, but my reading of the statute with regards to homegrown is we have no ability to control or enforce any regulations on homegrown, and homegrown can be passed to anybody over the age of 21 without, as long as it's without remuneration or publicity.
That is correct.
Okay, so, and you can grow up to 12 plants, pass off 6, grow another 6, pass off 6, grow another 6, is according to the handcuffs the legislature has placed on us. Is that your understanding?
That is, Mr. Stevens.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Kerber?
Go ahead,
If I'm...
So if he's looking, I'm sorry, he's earning his keep tonight.
Well, interesting question on the personal use and personal growth. Can somebody, if they were living downtown in a second or third story apartment or condo, if they had a balcony out there, could they grow it within public view, or does it have to be screened?
There's a screening mechanism, like, it's my understanding, you can't, and that really hasn't been tested, the quality. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, yeah, there is a screen, and, yeah, secured closet room, greenhouse, or other enclosed area
Okay.
on the grounds of the residence.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know there's a lot of misconceptions.
Yeah.
People think that they can put out in their vegetable garden, and that is not permissible.
Gotcha.
And it can't be used publicly, like you can't smoke marijuana in public,
That's
correct?
correct.
Okay,
Right.
Can't use cannabis in public, period.
right,
Can't pop the gummies or anything else.
right,
Well, I should say you cannot lawfully do that.
right, right,
Right.
We all know that.
Okay.
right.
All right, thank you.
While you're up here, because I'm trying to follow up on this question real quick, and I'm just, and maybe you'll get back to us on this or not, but in 3780, there's no longer medical dispensaries. So everything's going to be consolidated into one dispensary, just read under the statute. Is that your understanding?
No, they still have the medical dispensary protocol.
Correct, until that medical dispensary operator has to be a full dispensary. We can,
Yeah,
that's how I'm reading, I'm not trying to.
Mhm.
And that's why I asked the question about what we have defined right now, because, and maybe Mr. Davis can speak to this, I thought that we already had, when we went through the previous process, to say that there would be no medical operators, that those were defined, and we had legislation saying no.
Correct.
So, okay.
And that's what's in place. So you can, you know, you can be a standalone, just only medical dispensary, as long as you follow all the state's regulations, and, you know, the municipality doesn't zone it out. Yes, that whole protocol for medical, that's still in place.
So by saying adult cannabis dispensary, you could be medical and a full dispensary, or you could just be medical?
We would, yes, we would
Okay.
define it under 3780
Okay.
as being what, whether it's a processor, cultivator, or a dispensary, we would use the definition from 3780, which deals with just the recreational. We would not, unless suggested otherwise, the ban on the medical facilities would remain in place.
Well, I guess I'm wondering why we would allow recreational and not allow medicinal, when most of us have said that medicinal is the reason we can see this. Is that another change that would have to be made?
That would, because that is enacted in the zoning code, that they're prohibited.
Okay.
I think we're going to see this legislation in January, maybe.
Oh, well, I won't be here in January. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Are we wanting, two of you, our council people cited medicinal. Are we wanting medicinal? Now is
Okay.
the
Well,
justification
I just
for it,
wouldn't
or
want to preclude it
Okay.
because we already have, and all we would have is
And I-
recreational. That doesn't seem to make any sense.
And I agree with you on that, because it might also make a difference on insurance.
Okay,
And people have prescription paid for.
my
Certain
comments with, or speaking with Mr. Titterington, I brought that issue up, and he said that by passing the medical, or passing the ability to have a marijuana dispensary in the city of Troy makes, it will be a medical and a recreational. The state has lumped those two together, is what he told me.
So there could possibly be some other zoning code changes that would be required.
Well, according to Mr. Titterington, no, if we pass the dispensary, then that would automatically include the medical.
And since he's not here, could we have the word?
Possibly, but I would imagine if there were any words that said we can't have medical, they're gonna have to be struck from the...
He doesn't have a law degree. I was just wanting the opinion of Mr. Kerber on that.
Well, Mr. Kerber already gave us his opinion.
I think maybe, perhaps Mr. Davis ought to be heard on that issue, because I think you can answer the questions that they're asking. Is that correct?
I would obviously refer to the law director, but I would assume that they would need to be changed.
As I showed him, 1149.13 and 1149.14, the title was Prohibition of Medical Marijuana Cultivation and Processing and Prohibition of Medical Marijuana Dispensaries. So those would need to be altered if you were to allow those.
Okay.
So that would be part of the legislation, to say we're allowing this full...
If that's what the committee wants.
That's part of
yes.
your recommendation.
Well, I think that's what we have presumed, so we will make that clear.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what the recommendation would have to include, is both. I quite honestly, because I forgot about the ban on the medicinal.
Okay. All right, so, some of the questions that have been asked to us are, the one that comes down to how does prohibiting adult use cannabis dispensary reduce the use and impact of cannabis by adults in our city? And again, we all know that illegal drugs and cannabis are everywhere. If you want it, you can get it. Since President Nixon declared the war on drugs in 1971, our country has spent billions of dollars trying to stop the inflow of illegal drugs into our country, and billions more to help treat the devastating effects of illegal drugs on our citizens. Yet illegal drugs and cannabis use has continued to increase. Public pressure to decriminalize and legalize the use of cannabis for both medical and recreational use has been successful, and now both are legal in the state of Ohio. The registered voters of Troy approved the legislation, the legalization of recreational cannabis, by a majority vote that some would call a landslide. The state-regulated adult cannabis dispensaries are located a 10-minute drive from our city. Since 2019, state-regulated adult cannabis dispensaries have taken $2.1 billion of drug money off the streets and out of the hands of our neighborhood drug dealers. And the question then becomes, where do you want the residents of Troy to purchase cannabis? From our unregulated local neighborhood drug dealers, or a local adult cannabis dispensary regulated by the state of Ohio? Cannabis is going to be purchased. It's just a question of where. The second question that has come up again was, how does prohibiting adult cannabis dispensary reduce the underage usage of cannabis by our children in the city of Troy? The Miami County Drug-Free Coalition is especially concerned about the epidemic use of cannabis by students at Troy City schools. One thing is for certain: the students of Troy City schools will not be purchasing their cannabis from an adult-use cannabis dispensary, no matter where it is located. With the cost of establishing an adult-use cannabis dispensary estimated to be at well over $1 million, no operator in their right mind would sacrifice their $1 million business for a $30 sale to someone under the age of 21. Troy school students will continue to purchase their cannabis from their friends, their classmates, willing adults, and other local neighborhood drug dealers. A local adult cannabis dispensary will have little impact on underage usage of cannabis, as they have since before I was a student at Troy High School. Troy City school students will always find cannabis suppliers. As a Troy City Council member, I applaud the efforts of our local drug-free coalition. As they continue their work to reduce illegal drugs in our community, I would hope, as other council members would, welcome any ideas that the coalition has and feels the city could help with to reduce illegal drug usage by Troy school students or our community population in general. Illegal drug use is not just policing or a public health issue. It is an issue that affects everyone in the community. Everyone's help is needed to find the solutions. Okay. So with that, I think we have some questions that the committee has to take a look at and make recommendations on. And I've got these listed here, so we're going to go over them one by one. The information from the Planning Commission was a little confusing. They combined a positive question with a negative question, and so I think we need to, first of all, split those. So the first question before the committee would be, does the Community and Economic Development Committee wish to recommend to the Troy City Council to accept the Troy Planning Commission recommendation to change the Troy zoning code to allow adult-use cannabis testing laboratories as a permitted use in the M3 general industrial districts?
I don't, if I can speak to that, I don't think we have a choice about that.
We have to approve it or not approve it.
I understand we have to approve it, but we have to approve it. The adult testing laboratories, did you say?
We don't have to approve it, but the question is this is what, the question before the committee right now is, do we want to approve this part of the question?
The adult testing laboratories.
Yeah, the adult testing laboratories.
And again, I will ask, it was my understanding that we can say where they will be zoned, but we can't say that they cannot locate here.
Lynn, all I'm doing, Mrs. Sneed, the only thing I'm doing here is reading what was presented to us by the Planning Commission, and the wording of this question is pretty much what the Planning Commission came out and stated, that we have to change the Troy zoning code to allow adult-use cannabis testing laboratories as permitted use in the M3 General Industrial District. This was the recommendation made by the Planning Commission. We have the right to either accept their recommendation or refuse it.
Well, I think we have to accept it, so I
Okay.
would say that we accept that.
We move forward on this. Mr. Pierce?
Let's get the word of Mr. Carver.
They make a distinction between private testing labs and state-sponsored ones. The city can still regulate the private testing labs, but not the state-sponsored ones. I just wanted to be that clear.
Okay.
And then that would override, that state law. If somebody wanted to bring a state-sponsored testing lab here, the city couldn't say, well, our zoning says you're not allowed in here. They would be allowed to set that up.
The only thing we're doing is setting it up in the M3 district.
Okay.
That's what I thought we'd been told from the beginning.
Right. And that's exactly what we're talking about here in the city.
Yeah, you can treat those different. I just want to make there's a distinction between what we can do and can't do with the state ones.
Right.
But it's always been referred to as adult-use testing laboratory.
Yes, the recommendation from this is exactly what I picked up from the recommendation from the Planning Commission, so that if we have to amend this to get it right, would that require
No, if that's consistent with,
when you write the legislation, when you present it to the council, it'll be correct, in other words?
yes.
Okay, that's all we need on that.
And just to clarify, you're asking for that to be a separate piece of legislation because we are...
I'm separating out the questions because I feel they're confusing. In other words, that the Planning Commission gave us a statement that the Planning Commission gave us a statement with both a negative and a positive response required, and I think it was confusing for everybody.
And we certainly could do that in two separate pieces of legislation.
Okay, that's fine. That's great. Okay. What is our recommendation on this part of it?
So on the first question, move forward
Move forward.
affirmatively
Okay,
to
that's
establish
great.
that.
Okay, the second question. Does the Community and Economic Development Committee wish to recommend to Troy City Council to accept the Troy Planning Commission recommendation to amend the Troy zoning code to prohibit adult-use cannabis operations in all zoning areas in the city of Troy? Or does the Community and Economic Development Committee wish to recommend to the Troy City Council to decline the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission and recommend to amend the Troy zoning code to allow adult-use cannabis operators within the city of Troy with the following restrictions. Adult cannabis operators would be restricted to the B4 Highway Service District. For those who are not familiar with that, we have 3 different zones, in my understanding, and Tim, maybe you can help me with this part of it. But number one area is bounded by West Market Street on the south. It would be west of South Dorset Road and south of Arthur Drive and east of I-75. Zoning Area 2 would be the Walmart shopping area along West Main Street, limited by the north boundary of the property, Experiment Farm Road to the west, and I-75 to the east. The third zoning area would be at the corner of I-75 interchange, south of West Main Street, east of South Troy Town Drive, which is where Aldi's is at and Frisch's, where Frisch's was, and to the south by the Honda Distribution Center property line. Okay, number 2, there would be a limit of 1 adult cannabis operator dispensary within the city of Troy. And then number 3 would be adult cannabis operators would be permitted to operate adult cannabis dispensaries only. Adult cannabis cultivators and processors would be a prohibited use in all zoning areas of the city of Troy. Is there any questions on that?
And I would just ask, do we need to include in our recommendation that any previous ban of medical dispensaries be adjusted, changed in the code?
I think we could do that as well. I think that we would include our dispensary definition would include medical and recreational, but again, any cultivators or processor, whether they're medical or recreational, would be banned in the city of Troy.
I would agree with that. Mm-hmm.
That was just proposed to me today by Councilwoman Snee, so I want more time to think about that. So for right now, my answer is a no on that.
Okay. Okay. I would go along with everything we talked about on this area. I would think that we want to. I think for the first question is that I think it sounds like the committee is not willing to ban all cannabis operators in the city of Troy. I think that we would accept a cannabis operator dispensary only in the B4 Highway Industrial Zone. It would be 1 cannabis operator dispensary. And then the other thing would be to, again, not permit any cultivation processors, and number 4 that we would include medical in the dispensary, but again, not include medical cultivators or processors. That sounds like a pretty good summary on that.
I do have a question. Are we allowed to limit it where there's cultivators are not allowed? Because if this does pass, we only get whoever asked for it first gets.
Well, I understand it, and I have a problem with granting a monopoly, but again, I think we need to do baby steps on this, and that we can always go back, and if this thing works out, we can always add a dispensary in the B4 zoning area, but it's not something we have to consider right now.
But if your question, if I understand it, Mr. Pierce, was, are we saying dispensaries only and not cultivators and not processors? Yes, that is what we are saying.
And are we allowed to limit that?
Yes. Well, Mr. Kerber said he was 90% sure that we were allowed to do that, so that will come back to us in a legal opinion. And
my only caveat is, if we do find out that we are not allowed to limit the number of licenses, would this issue come back to this committee before legislation is prepared? If that makes sense. Because that legislation then would not agree with what we're recommending.
tentatively
I
amend.
would suggest that be the case, because there may be, in that situation, there may be some alternatives you may want to consider, such as, you know, and I'm not saying these are just examples of types of, you know, it has to be, you know, 1,000 feet from a daycare. There could be further restrictions that you may want to look at, rather than a numerical cap on it.
Gotcha.
Thanks. And also, I would just add, in respect to Mr. Kerber's request, that this legislation, if it's prepared, would come to the December 16th meeting of City Council and not to our very week from today meeting that includes Thanksgiving. I think that's a bit much to ask
Okay, that
from
sounds
our
good. Let's see how this-
esteemed law director.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, so just to summarize here, I think the committee is voting a 2-to-1 to proceed as we recommended as far as accepting the cannabis dispensary. Is that the right conclusion, Mr. Pierce?
Well, I would ask that you email that out to everybody, what you're recommending in those detailed words that you have there.
I will do that. I can
Well,
definitely send an email.
won't that come out with the committee report?
Well, it will, but I will get it to Mrs.
Email it to me.
Yeah.
So I would.
I'll get it to you until you take care of it for me.
And we can start to
It's getting
look at
late.
and we can email that to Mr. Pierce, and we can look at a draft of a
Yeah.
committee report, which has to go in the packet on Wednesday, which would have
Okay.
a majority and minority report.
Okay, that sounds good. Mrs.
So,
Knight?
just to clarify, Mr. Pierce, you agreed with our first question for the adult testing laboratory, so that's
Yes,
a report from all of this
That's
committee.
going forward.
That's unanimous.
And then your minority report for this.
Will be a minority report on this one.
Correct.
But both
minority report on that.
neither piece of legislation would be on Monday's agenda. I think they're a little bit
That's
handy.
what I would recommend.
Okay. Okay. Is there anything else before this committee tonight?
No, sir, not tonight.
That's enough? Okay. We are adjourned.
Thank you.